Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to yet another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kemibaro. Our guest today is Dan Kwach. We're here in their offices at NBO1, the data center facility that was set up in Nairobi as the first 12 years ago. And this is an interesting data center in that it's the most interconnected data center in this part of the world, but also it is both cloud and carrier neutral, meaning that they're able to serve both telecommunications, financial services providers, and all nature of enterprises who are able to benefit from this incredible facility. Dan and I had a great conversation last year at the inaugural ITW Africa event here in Nairobi. We had a great chat about what Africa Data Centers is doing in this region. But more importantly, we're going to catch up till today, which is about a year later. And also, again, just get Dan to give us a little bit of a backstory about himself and how he got started here at Africa Data Centers. Karibu sana, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Moses. Really, it's a pleasure that today we've gotten the time for you to pay us a physical visit. And rightly, like you mentioned, we had an initial conversation that was at ITW Africa.
Yeah.
And while we talked from outside of the data center, we were at the conference venue. I think a lot of the things that I was mentioning or talking about, I always say it's only fair that you get to come and see for yourself.
Yes.
The nuts and bolts of what a data center is about. But then again, you also get to meet the team members who are behind the very exciting achievement that Africa Data Centers has been able to meet so far. And so thanks for taking time and coming over today. So maybe just to start off, you're right to mention that we've been in the space and we were the very first cloud and carrier neutral data center player in Eastern Africa. These forms makes for a reflection moment for me. I would say probably about 12 years ago, just when we were, rebranding as East Africa Data Centers, I personally had a very privileged position of being the data center manager then. And when I was the data center manager, I had again a very big opportunity in making for the team that was then, showcasing to Liquid Telecom the East Africa digital infrastructure assets that were then owned by Altex Stream East Africa. So if there's one thing I can never forget was the day I got to host our group chairman, that is, our founder and owner of the organization, this Tribe Masiwa.
Wow.
I had the privilege of hosting him because when he came to Kenya, part of what he had to do, which beyond the meetings and just making sure that there was a deeper assessment as to the business from from all the stakeholders. The other thing he had to do was to come to the data center and see for himself what the data center is, where it is actually located. So when I was as a data center manager, then I was only looking after the technical side of the data center.
Yeah.
I had just transitioned from the project manager. So I was the project manager who worked to deliver this very fast data center. And after I delivered the data center, then the next thing I was then challenged to do was, guess what? You've been involved in the design and project management and execution of the data center. We now want you to manage this data center facility. So as the data center manager, I had the honor to then take him around, show him what it is that we had actually built in this facility.
Correct.
And when we were walking around, one thing that has stuck with me to date was, as we do the walkthroughs and me showing him all the mechanical and electrical systems, then the next thing he mentioned to me was, Dan, if there's one thing I like about this very organization, is that you guys are very good technically, and you tell me a lot in terms of the technical features of this data center.
Correct.
But one thing that is worrying me is I don't find you guys equally strong from being an entrepreneurial or being entrepreneurially driven.
The business focus, yeah?
Yeah. How do you make sure that beyond, you just talking about the technical terms and using acronyms, what exactly are you guys doing to just make sure that whatever you're doing makes sense in the business world?
Exactly.
That was a eureka moment for me.
Correct.
And it made me really make sure that I got to appreciate that really, if you were to excel, then be in the technical or the technology world, then for all intents and purposes, beyond understanding the technical concept, beyond understanding technology, please try and also make sure that you can actually understand what is the actual need that this very technology or solution is meeting out there.
Correct.
And how exactly are you making sure that it's adding value to your customers?
Correct.
And how are you also, what are you also doing to make sure that you are the best at what you're doing?
Fantastic.
Because that is what matters to a shareholder. That's what matters to your customers. Not really you speaking tech, but you speaking to something that is aligned to their pain points. What is my pain, and how exactly are you making sure you're coming through for me so that I can actually come to Africa data centers and not go anywhere else? So I always believe that really, to date, anytime I have a chance to have a conversation with my team members, I tell them, guess what? Anyone can have a data center, anyone can build a data center, and anyone can actually hold the positions that we hold. But if there's one thing we have to do, let's make sure we are asking ourselves, how are we making sure that the customer out there sees me as the best data center technician? And in terms of me being a technician, how does it align to a challenge or a need of theirs? How do I make sure that a banking institution has comfort in coming to Africa data centers and not any other data center player? So how do I make sure that the trust and the dependability, the reliable infrastructure they're looking for, that's what I'm talking to, and not the technology that we have actually used to build, design, and operate the data center facility?
Correct.
So yeah, we must make sure that we are entrepreneurial in as much as we've got a very deep understanding as subject matter experts in the data center space. So we were fast. We today take that leadership position, being the most connected, having the highest density of financial players in our data center space. We are privileged to host hyperscale customers, and hyperscale really just means those technology companies that make use of data center resources in bigger scale. And who are these? These are then those cloud service providers. And the cloud service providers can be the likes of, you talk about Google, you talk about Microsoft, you talk about Tesla today. All these are data center resource hungry organizations. They need a lot of power. They need a lot of cooling capacity. They need very good and reliable security and secure environment. They need multiple network players that can then make sure that the services that they are hosting is then consumed out there. They need a team that really understands what it takes to make sure that there's 100% availability of that very service that is run out of the infrastructure that we are hosting with them. So we've made sure that we keep to the mantra of continuously improving and making sure that we are always customer centric or customer obsessed. How do we make sure that customers see us as their best partners, because we understand what their needs are, and we've come through by way of having a solution that meets that need in a way that no other player can.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back a little bit in terms of maybe just for our audience, to get a full appreciation of who Africa Data Centers is, both on the macro level in terms of the continental footprint, but also now when we zoom into Kenya, what is it that you've accomplished here in terms of the capability and kind of the infrastructure that you deployed within your Kenya location?
Yeah. As it is, we are leaders in the market today, and our leadership position is informed by what metrics. The very first thing one will maybe talk about is what capacity of data center. What's our capacity in terms of the data center resources? And data center resources are always viewed in terms of physical space. But I think the best metric is in terms of how much power are you consuming in the IT resources that you have in your data center space. So that has been a very good way to balance, because physical space on its own won't matter if at all you also don't look at how much power are you consuming in that very physical space.
Okay.
And then that will also influence how much of cooling requirement do you need for that very physical space as well. So the two metrics, we are the largest in terms of being a player that today has 4 megawatts of data center capacity sitting in one location. This is in Nairobi. But these 4 megawatts, we've been able to build it over the years. So right from day one, we built this we put up this shell of the data center. This was done between 2009 to 2011. That's when we built this whole shell of these 4 megawatts that we are today having fully in place or available for the local market to use. But beyond the capacity that you have, how much of it has then been consumed or used up by the customers that you have?
Correct.
So as things stand at the moment, we are at about 95%, beyond 95% of our capacity has been used up or is actively consumed by different customers. And these different customers also forms for a metric to just appreciate our role in this very market. You're talking of over 100 network service providers in this very data center. That
100.
over 100 network players.
Wow.
So you go to, you go to independent platforms or registries like Peering DB, which is just, it's a register that gives an indication of the data center facilities, the network players that are present in those data center facilities. You go to those independent registries, you'll find over 100 network players really present in our data center facility in Nairobi. And these 100 network players, who are they serving? They are serving the banking and financial sector players whom we host, or the local enterprise players whom we
Correct.
host in our data center space. So again, on that particular front, I will say beyond 70% of Eastern Africa, Kenyan banking institutions are also hosted in our space. And we host them by way of them making use of our site as a production site, or could be an alternate or a high availability site, or a backup site,
Correct.
so to speak. So their critical IT infrastructure is also again hosted in our space. So again, we've got the highest density of financial sector players, and this is courtesy of the very good and secure data center environment that we've created. But again, I think the trust that these players have had over the years, because we've been able to achieve 100% availability for quite a long time. But this is again, I would say, courtesy of the years of experience we've had to make sure that we can operate the data center in a way that meets that 100% availability. But beyond the enterprise and financial sector players, we've got another wholesale or hyperscale customer segment that speaks to the cloud and content players.
Again, more the international companies.
Exactly.
Huh?
So these are again the international companies that really just want to bring their cloud services into Kenya, and they're doing that for so many reasons. They're doing that because we've got data center players like ourselves, and we can meet their requirements by way of the technical design and build and operate of the data center of the data center. But we're also achieving that because they need well-connected data centers. So that 100 plus network players that we have gives them comfort that really this is a well-connected data center, and they can then make use of it so that they can have a cloud deployment, or a content distribution point that can then store their content or store their services, but also make it easier that these services can then also be distributed in the region or within the continent, but outside of Eastern Africa.
So if I understand you correctly, and this is something I was even discussing with one of the somebody you know by the way, but I'll not mention his name, in the ISP space. And he was explaining to me just last week, I think we had lunch, the way that when the hyperscalers have come into the data centers, what it's allowed them to do is to provision their propositions, whether it's streaming or whatever services they're providing locally, in a way where there's almost zero latency. It's very fast, very efficient. Maybe you can expound on that approach?
You're very right, Moses. Traditionally, if we didn't have this kind of content and cloud service players physically having their infrastructure in Kenya, then naturally they'll be sitting outside of Kenya, and that just means a longer time for you to hit their servers or their storage system so that you can access these services. The time it takes for you to access those services, that's what in technical terms we call latency.
Correct.
So we are reducing that latency by way of now making sure that that cloud and content player is now physically sitting in Kenya.
Correct.
So we've reduced it by way of eliminating that international hop, which was going to take you a longer time.
Yes.
And the fact that we've reduced that just enhances and sort of makes for a better user experience.
Correct.
By way of you making use of cloud-based services in a much quicker way. So if at all you're probably wanting to access streaming services or digital content that is probably, say, an online streaming solutions provider like, say, Netflix or any kind of technology company, if at all they have that kind of content a lot closer to you or the end user, then naturally that's going to enhance that user experience. But there is also the data protection or the data sovereignty aspect to it, which is really, again, them creating an opportunity for local tech companies to then, sort of form or make part of their value chain or the part of their supply chain. So by way of this content and cloud service providers coming into Kenya, they create opportunities for other intermediaries.
Yes.
So that these intermediaries can then, buy this kind of services in bulk and find a way to then resell to the end users. And that in itself, again, just, sort of creates opportunities for the market, creates opportunities for some of the tech companies, so that they can then be what we call cloud service partners. So a CSP, you become a cloud service partner because the cloud services provider wants a cloud services partner who they then empower with the skills needed so that they can provision these cloud services and also make sure that they can actually be their sales their sales
On the
arm
ground,
on the ground
Wow.
with a deep understanding of customer requirements. So they become a good intermediary. They have a good understanding of the customers, but they also have a good understanding of the technology that this cloud service provider is offering. So that has been happening, and we've seen a lot of growth in that particular space. When we are talking about these 100 plus network service providers, a lot of them today are having conversations with these very cloud service providers so that they can go beyond just offering traditional connectivity. What can they do so that they can also tap into this whole, cloud service providers coming back into Africa? What can they do so that they can also offer some of the technological solutions that these cloud service providers are having? And that's a good thing for the continent. That's a good thing for Africa.
Yeah. So let's come back again. There's a phrase you've used, of course, which I understand, but I think maybe our audience don't appreciate what it is. I think the area of data sovereignty. I think we're living in an era now where data privacy has become important. Also, in the geopolitical environments that we're currently operating, it's becoming important that a lot of data is now domiciled in country versus sitting, let's say, in North America. Maybe you can expound a little bit on that concept and also why it's becoming fundamentally important, not just to Kenya, but many countries on the African continent.
Thanks a lot. I think, data protection laws or data protection frameworks, what this really talks or speaks to is anyone who's then accessing digital services. You are accessing that digital service that then has some elements that needs to be addressed in terms of privacy issues. Why are we talking about privacy? You are a financial services player, and what that in effect means is you host and you have access to a lot of private and confidential data, mine and your account details, and how exactly am I spending my my money. All that makes for insights or private data that a financial institution has.
Yes.
The next question is, how are we making sure that this data or this kind of insights is actually used for its intended purposes?
Correct.
It's only fair that if at all we are consuming or making use of digital services a lot more, then let's have a legal mechanism, a legal framework that secures how this kind of data or how this kind of content is used or utilized. This is data that should not be abused, or this is kind of information that should not be used for unintended purposes. So a data protection law or framework really protects you and myself from having our data being used in a way that was unintended. And having it in law, this is what then makes for a data protection requirement or a data protection framework. So it just protects a data subject's interests by making sure that there is a law that speaks to what kind of data is private. And for this private data, how are we making sure that it's actually secured? Because an organization can be accessing it or processing it. This can be a financial institution. This can be any kind of institution that has access to your digital information by way of maybe your fingerprints, by the way of any kind of data that that should have otherwise been treated as confidential. So having a law in place is a good thing because it then means that any kind of digital services that also makes use of personal information, there is security in terms of how that kind of data is going to be utilized. And these cloud service providers, that makes for a requirement of theirs. This is why Kenya has become, an attractive market for them, because number one, there's a data protection law in place that speaks to how is confidential data going to be treated. How do we make sure that we can address any chances of a breach or misuse or abuse of data or private data? So there is a recourse as to how, again, if at all there's a breach, then how do you address it? Because as we all say in terms of cyber security or security of digital services, a lot of it is not about whether it can actually be breached, but it's about when it will be breached. Data protection laws address what happens if and when that data is actually breached or used in a bad way than was actually intended. So data protection laws have just helped in terms of at least making it comfortable that really let's then consume or make use of the digital services. Why? Because my interests have been well taken care of legally. I actually have a legal mechanism to make sure that I can hold an organization accountable should they not use my data, my private data, the right way.
How is Africa Data Centers in Kenya specifically, in addition to this data protection law, taking advantage or taking cognizance of this data sovereignty? Because as I understand it, even government, and I think now it's enshrined in regulation or laws that government data should never leave the country. So how are you taking advantage or provisioning, propositions of this nature to people like government?
So the very first thing we are doing is to make sure that these kind of data protection laws, if and when they are being discussed or being put in place, let them be put in place in a way that resonates with global best practice. So we actually influencing policy. I think let me just start off from there. Why are we doing so? Because as it is, we've got global best practices in terms of how should data protection laws be. And how data protection laws should be, number one thing, it should look at defining what data sets should actually be classified as confidential or private. And if at all there is a breach, or if at all there is maybe abuse or unauthorized access, then how do you have the tools and mechanisms to identify that kind of breach? And do you make sure that there is responsible disclosure just in case there's that breach? And then ultimately, was there an error of omission or commission that should actually then speak to the next thing, which is should an organization be held responsible in case should they be held responsible for to have probably had that error of omission or commission on their part? So if you listen to those principles, then you should never worry about whether digital services should then be sitting physically in a specific body. The global best practice is for us to look at those principles, and those principles then take away the idea where some countries are taking this very rigid stance that really data protection or data protection laws should first and foremost be enforced by way of us making sure that private and confidential data only sits in our national body. That is a wrong concept, and we try the much we can so that we are influencing that policy because it's unsustainable. Africa is a continent of 54 nations or countries. If at all each and every country was to probably then have that mindset that really we must have data protection laws first and foremost, having a requirement of confidential data sitting in our country, then that means data centers in all the 54 countries, which to me is unsustainable. So as a Pan-African data center player, we are influencing policy at that point and making sure that governments understand that, guess what, we are one continent. In same way we've got GDPR, which serves the European market. Let's think of data protection frameworks that is actually going to look at the African continent as a whole, and how do we then just harness on the resources and capabilities that we have in the different countries. If Kenya makes for its green energy capabilities, if Kenya makes for very good investor and regulatory climate like is happening, if Kenya has been intentional by the way of the government marketing us really as a home of technology and inviting all the tech organizations to come into this continent and tap into this very good broadband penetration that we've got, or the very stable network infrastructure that we have available, these form the building blocks for a digital economy, or for the digital services that we need to host in the continent and also make use of in the continent. We would rather be looking at the continent from that perspective, and to effect look at the regional markets that we have in the continent. This is why for Africa data centers, where are we present? We are present in Southern Africa, and we feel data centers in Johannesburg and Cape Town are ideal to serve that region. When you come to Eastern Africa, we are present in Kenya, but looking at the East African market as well, and just based on other developments, we are keen to maybe explore where else in Eastern Africa can we also have a second data center operation. You go to Western Africa, we are present in Nigeria, but beyond Nigeria, we've acquired land in Accra, that's in Ghana, so that we've got a second site in Western Africa that can also serve that particular market. And we have plans to make sure that, we don't leave out even the northern part of Africa. And we feel that looking at those economic hubs on the continent, Nairobi, Lagos, Johannesburg, Cape Town, and looking at the other parts of the northern part of the continent, we feel that building data center hubs in those markets, which traditionally we call data center king markets. We should then have data protection laws or frameworks
Yes.
that then considers those digital hubs as as they have been laid out, and to effect, what will that mean? A data center sitting in Kenya should be ideal to serve the East African market. A data center sitting in Nigeria should be ideal to serve the West African market.
Correct.
And so it eliminates that whole concept or that whole narrative that really, let's have data sitting in each and every country. Let's have data centers sitting in each and every of these countries. And whatever we say, in as much as we are defining it, it's actually influencing how the cloud service providers or the hyperscalers also want to roll out in the continent. They also want to walk this journey with us. And because they want to tap into this rich experience, the relationships we have in this market, the fact that we've been able to already have customers in all these markets where we operate, and we have a deep understanding of their requirements. They want to tap into that, and also we walk with us that journey and say, guess what? We want you to help us by way of, let's define what the data protection policies are going to be, but work with us in building these reliable data center hubs and allow us to bring in the digital services so that these digital services can then be used regionally. But in as much as they're used regionally, these regional data center hubs are all interconnected because we remain a connected world. And why are we having them connected? It's just to make it easier for our customers, to make it easier for the businesses, that if at all you're having your infrastructure in our data center facility in Nairobi, if you've got a similar deployment as well in our South African data center, then we want to make it easier that you can actually look at those regions as separated but well connected, such that you can have replication of the services or the data that you have. Correct. And this can only happen if we harmonize these data protection laws that we are talking about.
I hadn't quite looked at it that way, that sort of decentralization approach where let's think of the broader network. Let's look at the net benefit of tapping into the fact that you have this, data center capability across different markets, and in turn, within regions, you can serve, from say Nigeria, you can serve the entire West Africa region. I want to take another gear here because, again, this is something that we've noticed in the market now. There seems to be a proliferation of data centers in the last few years in this part of the world. Of course, Kenya is one of the epicenters of all things digital across the continent. But as this is happening, I remember now, and I'm speaking as a business person, at my marketing agency, Dotsabi, we've been hosting maybe over 100 websites in North America for many years. And historically, there was this sentiment that, that local infrastructure, local capability was not world-class. And I think you were very, very early, 12 years ago, to start building that capability locally. What would you say to people like myself, those who are running businesses where they require elements of cloud to provision, say, hosting for their clients or applications? Why would they start looking at the likes of Africa Data Centers to actually bring all those things back home?
Yeah. I think it's very important that every business has visionary leadership, and as businesses, we think globally but act locally.
Correct.
That's these are things that I've not only experienced, observed for this particular organization that we celebrate today, but I think thanks to a very visionary leadership we had over 12 years ago.
Yes.
We had a team that then sat and looked at the fact that, guess what, we are primarily a network infrastructure player, but don't we feel like beyond just building network infrastructure, shouldn't we start getting into the IT space?
Correct.
And if at all you are transitioning into the digital or the IT space, then the very first thing you have to do is again to build this multi-tenant IT environment, which is the data center in effect. And when we got into the data center space, as it is, the very first thing we then ask ourselves is, how do we make sure that we are doing it in a way that is future-proof? And that again makes for the visionary leadership, and us making sure that we can have a deeper understanding, not only of today's requirements, but of the requirements of our customers tomorrow.
Correct.
So that is how comes we then made sure that guess what? Let's take a step back. Let's be humble. We are getting into this data center space, and we've never been. So why don't we then just take a step back and go and learn what exactly are these global data center best practices, the data center build guidelines that we should adopt that will then future-proof this business. So we worked very well with the Uptime Institute to make sure that this data center is tier 3, is the very first tier 3 data center that was designed, built, and operated in Eastern Africa. And
What's a tier 3 data center?
yeah, so tier 3 data center, what that just translates to is extremely high availability of the digital services that are then hosted in that environment.
Okay.
What is that availability? We simply are telling our customers that for whatever happens, including what you'll probably call force majeure, or something that you didn't have any control over whatsoever, including all that, we should never have an outage or an incident in the data center that causes an outage that goes beyond 8 minutes in a calendar month. So if you look at what should you do to make sure that you can never have an outage that goes beyond 8 minutes in a calendar month, that will then speak to how do you design the energy distribution systems that are going to support that IT environment. How do you design and build the mechanical or the cooling and systems that are going to support that very data center? How do you make sure that the network services have dual paths and the capacities can actually meet that high level availability
Full
and in a
redundancy.
secure,
Yeah.
in a very secure manner? And again, the very important thing, how do you make sure that you have skilled teams that can actually understand your customers' expectations and always make sure that they are operating that data center environment to meet that very high availability that these customers have? And these are things that have been done world over. So what we did was just to, again, visit other data centers that had already been put in place in London, put in place in Southern Africa. And we said, guess what? Let's take up the challenge of demystifying this myth that, guess what? Africa is known for lack of good infrastructure, or Africa is known for, not very stable power. Africa is known for, a skills gap. While these are nuances that I appreciate, and I think I always take as a positive challenge for me. I think I like the fact that we took it up as a challenge and objectively saw how to tap into them and turn them into opportunities. So we turn them into opportunities by way of addressing that whole we've got unstable power in Kenya or in Eastern Africa, but guys, in as much as that is happening, what does it take so that we can sit down with KPLC and make them understand what we want to achieve? And they helped us so that we can achieve this very high availability that we've been able to achieve today. How do we make sure that the network players really come up with the redundant paths, not only into the data center, but even within the data center, so that we can achieve that high availability? How do we make sure that we can actually train our own staff so that one got out of the university as a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer or a computer science engineer? How do we make sure that we can translate that qualification to a job, to on the job environment, so that they can then understand that when you come to the data center, you've got a deeper understanding on the electrical engineering.
Yeah.
But how do we tap into that knowledge and translate into the high availability that we need in the data center space? How do we make sure that this mechanical engineer graduate from the university today has a very good understanding of the cooling environment, the fire suppression and safety requirements of a data center space? So I think what for all the things that I see to date, we still talk of gaps here and there. We still talk of the need to scale up, but I think organizations like ourselves have taken that bold and audacious move to just say, guess what? We understand those challenges, but we also see a big opportunity in us making use, as opposed to us focusing so much on the skills gap. I would rather we were addressing the unemployment gap in Africa.
Right.
So how do you do that? By just making sure that you and me, the same way someone trusted us right from campus to handle the technical jobs that we were doing, let's tap into these very ambitious Gen Z that we've got in Africa to see to it that that energy, the skills, the knowledge that they've got, how do we tap into it so that they can actually serve the globe, or they can serve the world as it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think we cannot not discuss today is the advent of generative AI or AI, right? So we are seeing globally that obviously when AI is provisioned, you not only require data center capabilities, but your data center needs to be able to run AI workloads.
Yes.
And I know that one of the big challenges, obviously, for Africa and Kenya at large is that, how do we start playing in this AI space, and what role will the likes of ADC yourselves be able to do to ensure that we don't get left behind in ensuring that our businesses, our enterprises, our governments are able to take advantage of this AI era?
No, you're right. You're right, Moses. And firstly, if I look at how we are structured as Cassava Technologies, so Cassava Technologies has got the connectivity business line, which is traditionally known as Liquid Intelligent Technologies.
Correct.
Then we've got a co-location business arm, which is where Africa data centers sit.
Okay.
Then, rightly, like you've just pointed out, and even before that, we've got what we call a cybersecurity and cloud C2 business arm. So we actually have connectivity, we've got co-location, we've got cloud and cybersecurity. But just now as we speak, we actually have a fifth C in our structure, which is a compute. And this compute is compute stroke AI.
Correct.
And it's just because we know and we see the interests, we see the opportunities in the AI space. And what we've taken up is how do we also, as Cassava Technologies, structure ourselves and make sure that we can understand, how is AI going to be used in the African continent? And how do we make sure that as a technology company, we are addressing that gap in terms of the digital infrastructure requirements from a network side and a data center side? So on the network side, that is well known and is addressed by our Liquid Intelligent Technologies business arm. But from a data center perspective, we are appreciating the very high energy consumption that we have in the AI space. While we've traditionally been looking at consumptions of 5 kilowatts per rack on an average, 5 kilowatts will traditionally be, the kind of power that I think a traditional house or a family of 5 will probably be making use of. 5 kilowatts will be sufficient in terms of their consumption on a daily basis. And that is what we actually consume in one rack. That is what we've designed our data centers to consume per rack.
Correct.
What AI has done is to disrupt that almost 20 times. AI speaks of one rack going to consume 100 kilowatts.
What?
You see? And that is the drastic shift in terms of the technology.
20 times the energy.
Almost 20 times the energy.
Wow.
This is why we are now talking about, for the same physical footprint, you're going to be consuming 20 times the kind of power that you've traditionally been consuming. And that is just because of the AI workloads that are hosted in data centers. Can this be hosted in existing data centers? Yes and no. It can be yes and no because it has to take a very innovative data center operator to see to it that you can actually sort of seclude some part of your environment and create the cooling solutions, the data center energy capabilities that you need for that kind of AI workload. So as Africa Data Centers, we are having engagements with some of the AI players in the industry, in the globe as well, and leveraging on the other Castech business pillars that I talked about. And we are now assessing how do we make sure that whatever we are building today, it has to be that it can actually host AI. So we are now talking of AI-ready data centers. So Africa Data Centers just launched 6 megawatts of its 6 megawatts of data center capacity in Cape Town. And that is among the very fast AI-ready data centers that we have as a business. But for wherever we are operating, including where we are in Nairobi, we are never going to activate any of our data halls, any of our data center spaces without making sure that it's AI ready. And that speaks to that kind of being culture of us being visionary and future-proofing our business as well. So we are going to make sure that we can actually we can actually accommodate the high energy and the weights of this AI kind of digital infrastructure that should be accommodated in all of our data center facilities. So whatever we'll be doing in Nairobi, we are talking about the 15 to 20 megawatts data center that we want to build. Customers get to ask us, so Dan, you look at the Kenyan market today as we speak, the total, if I can consolidate the Kenyan data center capacities, I think they could probably be 15 megawatts for
All
all
of
of us,
them.
for all of us.
Wow.
But that is for the, the very commercial data center players that we've got.
Yes.
But ADC alone is talking of building 15 to 20 megawatts on our own. Why are we doing that? It's just to meet that future requirement. And part of it is actually the AI requirements. And you can imagine it's ADC doing that, but we've got other data center players in the market who are also talking of doing hyperscale data centers. I think Microsoft and the G42 team made an announcement to tap into Kenya's geothermal energy capabilities, and they're talking of 100 megawatts data center that they want to build, they want to do. While people ask themselves, do we really have demand for that? If I look at the fact that we are today talking of enterprise workloads, but we are now wanting to build data centers for AI workloads, then I get to understand why exactly are they talking of that, that big quantum in terms of data center builds. So yes, I think for me, Africa data centers has traditionally had a lot of its major capacities in Southern Africa, but as things stand, definitely there's been a very big opportunity for growth in Eastern Africa. So we are going to see, an equal kind of focus, in terms of our expansion plans, in terms of what we are doing, to also make sure that we are tapping into the opportunities in East Africa.
Yeah. It's so funny, but about a year or two ago, in fact, when we met even at ITW Africa last year, I remember one of the questions being asked at the conference was, does Africa already have too many data centers? And I remember somebody on the stage, I can't remember who it was exactly, said, no, in fact, we need more. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But what are your thoughts around current capacity? You've talked about future capacity. I know in this facility, you're currently actually moving into a new floor, building out. But when you think about the next 2 to 5 years, what are you seeing in terms of what we need from a data center capability within this region?
I always say that, we have the privileged position of listening to those that question whether there is a chance that we actually have glut in the data center space.
Yes.
So we are in a privileged position of being part of those kinds of discussions.
Correct.
But we are also in a privileged position of sitting with tech companies who actually are frustrated by the lack of capacity of data centers.
So you're seeing both sides.
So we see both sides.
Yes.
So I can tell you, as Africa data centers, everyone talks about, you consolidate all our Africa data center, not Africa data centers as an operation, but you talk about data center capacities in the continent. We are probably 3% of what the world has.
As a global player. Yes.
We are only 3% of what the world has. Surely, if we're only 3% of what the world has, why don't we see that as an opportunity? And I can tell you for sure that when we sit with those organizations who actually are frustrated by the lack of capacity, then we get to understand that really we must sort of come through and sort of bridge that gap.
Yes.
And how do we bridge that gap? We sit with these hyperscalers that actually are looking for a lot of data center capacity than they see available in the continent. And what we then just do is to work with them so that we can make calculated risks and build, and as we say, build and they will come. But the build and they will come in a very uncertain environment, in a very uncertain market where people question whether consumption will happen like they have projected. We are also, resolving that uncertainty by making sure that, the other business arms like cloud and cybersecurity actually work with these hyperscalers so that we can work with them and come up with a go-to-market strategy that can also bridge the gap in terms of addressing their adoption concerns or their consumption concerns for this market. So we don't want to have a situation where, we've had a conversation with those that are actually feeling like we don't need to be building more. But we've also had a conversation with those that are actually feeling like, guess what? You guys only have 3% of data center capacity in the world. Now, 3% of the data center capacity in the world, then I should not even be having a chat with you because you guys don't have capacity. I would rather then just still be having our services hosted outside of the continent. So when you have these conversations, then we want to make sure that ultimately, let's address both concerns. We address both concerns by way of, bringing these hyperscalers to this market, but working with them so that we can also make sure that these services are actually consumed in the market, because we don't want to have a situation where these digital players come into Africa and they have a challenge in terms of how to have their services then consumed across the continent. Let them tap into the rich experience we have. Let them tap into the relationships we have in this market or in this continent, so that we can help them extend these services to the market as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something I want to talk about, which I think is still quite relevant. And we've come out of the pandemic now a few years. It was a critical moment. I think today, in my business, for instance, we are completely remote, meaning that we work mostly different locations as opposed to an office. But I'm imagining, and I'm just curious to hear from you, what was the implication or the impact of the pandemic vis-a-vis how obviously the market changed at the consumer level, but also for a business like yourselves? Did you see a significant impact as a result of that transformation that was caused by the onset of the pandemic in the market?
The pandemic had its fair share of challenges to all of us as businesses.
Absolutely.
But I will say, as a data center player, it actually made for heavy consumption of data center services. Why? Because it's only through the digital services that a lot of businesses were then able to work remotely. And by them working remotely, they ended up consuming a lot of the digital services that in turn are hosted in data centers. An organization like Microsoft, I think there was talk of them seeing almost 700% growth in terms of their digital service requirements, in terms of remote use, remote desktop. Not in this market.
Globally.
That was globally.
Wow.
And that was during the COVID pandemic. And that in turn they had to immediately meet a need that was unseen. And they had to come up with a very quick and a very agile, expansion strategy. How do you make sure that how do they make sure that they don't lose out on that opportunity to make sure that they are giving their customers the experience and the ease to work from home, or for lack of a better word, to work from anywhere? And anyone who's having that chance or capability of working remotely or doing anything from wherever they are, they get to consume data center services. And that in itself, from a business perspective, it really pushed us up to make sure that we are building a lot more data center capacities. But as a business or as a data center player as well, we also had to make sure that we had a relook as to how exactly do we make sure that we are doing everything while keeping our customers comfortable. That guess what? I have made sure that the customer can work from anywhere. But how do I make sure that the customer has a guarantee that we actually have a team that can still meet their requirements by way of looking after their services or their infrastructure in our data center space? So we had our IT teams always available to support these customers, and that has remained in place to date. Fantastic. So we've actually had to upscale so that our data center support teams can actually be a more trusted IT arm of our customers. And that, in effect, has created additional comfort to our customers. That guess what? Beyond just taking my IT infrastructure in their space, they actually have a team that I can rely on and remotely expect them to always support me if and when needed. So that is the kind of disruption that we've seen as a business. But the disruption turned out to be a positive in terms of digital infrastructure services and consumption. So that has remained in place, and I think we've now come up with a hybrid working model, and a lot of businesses have had to accept it, or at least embrace this whole idea that guess what, let's make sure that people can be productive regardless of where they are going to physically be positioned. And that in itself also means just more and more consumption of digital services. And that digital service that is being consumed, a data center is it's always the physical manifestation of this digital service. And that's what we do.
The cloud is the data center.
Exactly. When we talk about the cloud, it sits right within the data center physically.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is also really interesting to me is the challenge of getting the CIO or the head of IT in an organization to have the confidence to move a lot of their key infrastructure and sort of capabilities away from being on-premise to bring it to a location like yours. And the reason I'm saying this is I've already had the privilege of visiting several data centers. I also had a look at yours recently. But when I look at the infrastructure, almost a symphony of complexity that is within a data center. I almost look at organizations and ask myself, why would you even try and do what Africa Data Center does? Because the fact that you are so versed and competent in this area, how are you dealing with that skepticism that still seems to exist with a lot of CIOs who want to do things on their own?
I think we are glad in Kenya and in East Africa, in Kenya to be specific, we are glad that a lot of the CIOs have actually done away with that skepticism. And they've done away with that skepticism because we've been able to demonstrate the value in, you benefit from the point that you eliminate the cost of you building that very high standard data center environment. You are eliminating that cost already. If anything, we have gone beyond, just building that high tier 3 level data center that we are talking about, or commercial data center, multi-tenant data center that we are talking about. We've been able to do that. But I think the most important thing, again, that we've been able to do is to demonstrate that don't just focus on the elimination of the costs around building that data center, but there is an even bigger and complex requirement on how to operate that environment to make sure that you can achieve that high availability. Why, as a banking CIO or a financial institution CIO, would you want to be worried about the maintenance of the air conditioning units, security systems that you have? Why would you be worried about the UPSs? How efficient the generator or the power generation systems are in your space? While that is something that should worry you as a CIO, I think the conversation that I have with CIOs has today changed, and a lot of them would rather focus on how can they make sure that they are coming up with a product as a banking institution for their customers. How can they, enhance the user experience of the customers making use of their digital services? And they can only do that if they can do away with, what is non-core to them. So they've eliminated what is non-core to them, and that which is non-core to them is our core business. That for us is our bread and butter. Just making sure that we can always, have this reliable environment and have a team that takes care of all these things to give you that peace of mind that, guess what? Focus on what your customers want. In same way, I've also changed you from being a CIO to my customer, and in which case then, what gives you peace of mind is really my topmost priority. So we've been able to do that, and over time we've been able to not just talk about it, but demonstrate it.
Fantastic.
When we achieve that high availability, when we have these very many ecosystem partners or players within the same data center environment, then they again get to find it easier. Why should they be struggling with having a data center in their space, asking network providers to extend fibers into their space, looking for a cybersecurity provider? The cybersecurity provider is probably not seated within their space, so you have to go and get them. In our case, we have all these digital ecosystem partners in the same environment, and so they are actually a cable away.
Just interconnect and
interconnect, and you'll be able to get it.
And that's where the carrier and cloud neutrality becomes important. Yeah, yes, that's the key thing. Yeah. For some reason, I'm reminded of this famous meme where they say, Land Rover turning car owners into mechanics. There's been a history of, over the years, Land Rover had a reputation for reliability issues. But I think I'd almost say like Africa Data Centers is turning fundis into CIOs, meaning that you are taking them away from the tactical, mundane data center operations to becoming strategic about how they're using these capabilities. Exactly. I want to talk to you about a couple of more things before we wrap up. The first one is thinking about, I think, social impact, how you're, impacting the local community, possibly areas of sustainability. Maybe it's around also enhancing skill sets and competence in the market by building this class of data center professionals. What have we achieved so far in Kenya from that perspective at Africa Data Centers?
It's a coincidence that we are having this conversation when we are today hosting students from a school
who've come watching them up and down,
who've come visiting Africa Data Centers, and we always do this, and we are very intentional about it. So we create opportunities for these kinds of institutions to visit us, and we get to share with them, unpack what exactly is a data center all about. But I think the most important thing is we then sort of make sure that we can motivate them, we can share with them what it takes for them to transition from class and what should they be doing so that tomorrow, it's actually them, somebody else will be having a conversation around in terms of being a digital ecosystem player or an industry player that can also share what they've been able to do. So in same way we were in class, and today, we are holding these privileged positions of running the organization that is Africa Data Centers. We believe that is the right thing to do, to open up our doors so that they can actually come and understand and interact with all of our staff, get to really appreciate that really the only difference between us and them is time.
Yes.
And this is something that I get to share with them every time we get a chance to have these kind of conversations. So we participate in those kind of initiatives. We do mentorships. I was personally part of the Presidential Digital Talent Program as a mentor.
Oh, okay.
And it's quite, fulfilling for me that one of the gentlemen I actually mentored in that very program today works for a data center player that is in the UAE.
Wow.
And we keep in touch. Anytime he comes visiting in Kenya, he comes to pay me a visit just
Correct.
to say thanks. And for me, there's nothing more fulfilling than you seeing the impact you've made by way of shaping one's future. And you made that impact because you challenge the person to be a better version of yourself. You also shared your history in terms of how you've been able to achieve what you've been able to do. But you also, very importantly, shared the learnings or the failures that you had as an individual and the learnings or failures that you've also had as an institution, because they should make for learning moments.
Correct.
As well. So we do that, and we are very intentional about it to just make sure that beyond what we do, which is to be an employer of choice in this, not just in this market, but in the continent, we also want to make sure that we are part of those that are also, bridging that skills gap. And we want to do it from a very early staging point. I'm personally a father to 2 girls and 1 boy. And I always challenge all of them as well to just make sure that they can, make sure that they can be better in terms of what they have as their goals in life. We believe that they will tap into what we've been able to do, but we must also challenge them to be good citizens beyond what they're doing in class and acing their grades. Let them not forget character. So I always keep on telling everyone that, of all the things that you do, be that first-class student, but you'd rather you are a first-class student who's also seen as respectful, trustworthy, and a person of honor and good conduct in the society. So let's not forget any of these 2 metrics. Yeah,
fantastic.
So that's how I look at it.
Almost done here, but I have a couple of more burning questions. One, sustainability. I know that, when you think about data centers, energy consumption is
heavy,
the biggest thing. And I think even now globally, some of the big tech players are actually planning to start using nuclear power from what I'm reading, just because AI has transitioned energy to a whole new level. But in terms of being responsible and also being sustainable, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you've also done some initiatives over here around solar. I know that also the new facility that you're building upstairs has a sort of a more modern, more environmentally friendly cooling system. Can you talk a little bit about some of those initiatives? And maybe the last thing would be maybe around gender, maybe how you're bringing women into the organization, for instance, to benefit from these careers in data centers.
Oh, great. So as it is, you talk sustainability or, me sharing about our efficiency programs and achievements. As a data center player, our biggest cost point or pain point, which it depends on how you look at it, is actually how much power we get to consume. But again, the more power is consumed, actually the better for us, because it then just means a lot of the digital services that we are hosting are made use of in the market. But then, because power is very costly, then you have to make sure that you are green in terms of the generation or the source of energy that you have. Kenya, we are at a privileged position. Almost 94% of our power is generated through hydro, which is naturally green. So this is why Kenya has actually been earmarked as the home of green data centers. When you're talking about 94% of our energy already green, then that's okay. But as Africa Data Centers, we've even gone ahead to address that 6% gap by looking at how do we still bring in more of green energy, because we want to reduce as much as possible any dependency on carbon emitting energy sources, which is really the generators being run in our data centers. But so long as we are making use of the 94% and complementing it with solar energy like we have done as Africa Data Centers, you talk about our Nairobi facility, almost 20% of our energy is also coming from solar energy. And
Wow.
we've got the largest solar energy installation in our data center campus in Nairobi
Wow.
right now. And this is helping us in two ways. It's helping us by increasing our green energy credentials, but it's also helping us by way of reducing the cost of energy, because the solar energy commitments that we have and is a lot cheaper than what we are buying from KPLC.
Wow.
So with that kind of business model of just making sure that we are getting the green energy that we have uh, from KPLC, but complementing it with our own solar energy plant that is at the data center, makes us much more greener. And this is something that we feel is right, because we want to make sure that we are green by way of consuming green energy, but also making sure that we can reduce the costs on energy. And when we reduce on that cost, then that makes our product, affordable in the eyes of our
Fantastic.
customers. That's a good thing. But I think in the future, as things unfold, definitely we want to make sure that we are going, we are building hyperscale data centers. And so we'll be exploring where we can actually have 100% of green energy, in same way everyone talks about the geothermal energy capabilities that we've got. If and when we can be able to, also sort of tap in those kind of opportunities, we'll definitely share with our customers. Speaking to what you've talked about in terms of what do we do in terms of being intentional and making sure that we are empowering the girl child and making sure that they are also a key player in the field, in the space of technology. Moses, you'll be shocked, but I think when I look at our East African team, probably 60% of our senior leadership team are actually ladies.
Fantastic.
And that is just in terms of, our sales leadership team, our project engineering team from a development perspective, our customer experience and service management team, our finance head. And we've been able to make sure that it's not just talk, but we can demonstrate that, guess what, let's be intentional in terms of, demystifying these myths that, ladies should not be so much associated with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics related kind of courses or opportunities in the world. So as a tech company or as a technology services company, we are an equal opportunity employer without any kind of bias. But, being that we are in Africa, we feel it's the right thing to do, that we take a lead in terms of not just, giving our sisters a lot of opportunities to demonstrate that they can actually work in tech and engineering environments, but actually doing it. And we've done it by way of, the numbers that I've just shared with you in terms of our senior leadership team. But yes, that also forms part of, the mentorship engagements that and interactions that we have with other industry players. So anytime we have an opportunity to maybe speak to young students in the universities, young students in high school, or even in primary schools, we actually get to challenge them and make sure that they can appreciate that, guess what? No, we are in an era where there shouldn't be any kind of discrimination based on gender. So we do that, and they see for themselves that really we are leading on the front in terms of making sure that we can see to it that ladies form a critical component of our staff.
Correct.
Yeah.
So Dan, maybe my last question would be to you: is there anything else that you think our audience should know about ADC, in particular around this region which you're responsible for, that could be of interest? And perhaps maybe, if somebody or an organization was thinking about using your facilities, how would they be able to onboard with you?
I think first and foremost, Moses, mine is just to thank the customers who've trusted us over the years and made us the leaders in this data center space. As the leaders, I always tell my teams that it's one thing being a leader, but it's more important that you actually secure that leadership position. And you can only secure that leadership position if you continuously challenge yourself for growth. So we are continuously making sure that we are improving how we are operating our data center facilities. We are increasing our capacity because there is a bigger demand for our services by our customers than we can meet today. And that is just based on the trust that we've built over the years. So thanks to the market for trusting us over the years. But I think even going forward, mine is just to again give them a guarantee that really we are going to continue doing what we are good at, which is being your dependable and trusted partner in the digital ecosystem space or the digital infrastructure space. And we will continue making sure that we can be more agile, more innovative, to just make sure that we can meet your needs in a way that I will say doesn't just meet your needs, but goes beyond what you actually expected of us. So that continuous engagement to make sure that we can actually get feedback. Definitely, I'm always very much available, and I sit on the technology service providers of Kenya's board.
Okay.
I'm one of the directors, and again, that creates an opportunity for me to interact with so many other customers of ours and other partners that we have in this market. And that continuous engagement has always helped in terms of positioning ourselves appropriately to meet these markets' needs. So we'll continue doing so. Be it on from a policy perspective, we will take that leadership position to at least be engaging the government and other stakeholders as well, so that we are coming up with the right regulatory framework or arrangements for the customers and the end users as well. So a lot of exciting stuff. We are presently in Nairobi, but there's a lot going to happen from an East African perspective, because we've got other properties that we have acquired. So there's going to be expansion in Nairobi, and there's going to be expansion outside of Nairobi. We also intend to extend into other East African markets, and that is going to happen within the next 5 years, within the next 2 years, not even 5 years. So there's a lot that we've been able to at least achieve for now by way of bringing other investors who want to walk this journey with us in terms of bridging this digital gap that we have in Africa. So yeah, we never want to leave anyone behind in the African continent. So whatever it takes to bridge that digital divide, we are more than happy, and always a pleasure to interact with our customers. Let them always feel free to reach out to me directly.
Great. So Dan, thank you so much for sharing so openly, sharing with us a journey over 12 years that Africa Data Centers has taken here in Nairobi, here in East Africa. But more importantly, I'm even more excited about the future in terms of the potential and the opportunities that are presented by what it is that you offer. Right now, I'm looking forward to the team to go and see the rest of the data center. We're going to take a tour to see what is there. And most importantly, I think just so that people can appreciate what it actually takes to do what you do. So we hope we'll be able to share that story with them in a way that really opens their eyes to what is actually involved in running a world-class data center here in Nairobi.
Thanks a lot, Moses. Thanks a lot, Moses, and it's quite a pleasure. And thanks for creating as a platform for us to share these, what I call authentic African stories, so that
Absolutely,
people can know the exciting stuff that we're doing.
Fantastic. Yeah. Cheers. There you have it, a wonderful conversation with Dan Kwach here. He shared with us incredible insights about what this data center does, how it works, and we're just about now to proceed to do the site tour to see how this data center operates top to bottom. More importantly, they're handling hyperscalers, some of the biggest big tech brands that we know globally, who are provisioning their services right here in Nairobi in this data center. And really, I think it's an opportunity to see what exactly it takes to deliver a world-class data center that is both carrier and cloud neutral right here in Nairobi. We'll catch you in the next one.